right, hello everyone. Welcome to a special live stream on the Pox Populi YouTube and Odyssey channels. I am going to be speaking with some very special guests, Southern Nordic, Hwitgeard, and Gaddius Maximus. And we're going to be talking tonight about current things, but also timeless questions. And so, without any further ado, let me just introduce my guests. Southern Nordic, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Pox, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just basically an Appalachian, a hillbilly. I've got Celto-Germanic blood, and I'm interested in finding solutions for us to be able to survive what's coming here in the future.
All right, fantastic. Hwitgeard, how are you?
Hello. I'm not too bad, thank you. It's good to be back on here again and having a chat with you. I always enjoy the talks we have so far. I'm looking forward to tonight.
Yes, it's true that. So I was on Southern Nordic's stream a few months ago. And then Hwitgeard, you were one of the first guests I had on my streams when I started doing interviews with guests. We had a really good chat about pre-Christian European ethno-faiths, traditions, religions, things like that. And it was a great conversation. I think I still get positive feedback from it even today. So glad to have you back on your second appearance here. And then last but not least, we have Gaddius Maximus. Hello, Gaddius. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Pox? Good to be with you gentlemen tonight on a nice Friday evening.
All right, and we can tell that you're driving, so be safe there on the road. We can kind of hear you all right. Maybe your audio will improve as the microphone adjusts. All right, so let's just get right into it. I've invited you all on to talk about something that has been the sort of current thing of the past few weeks, but really quite a longer time than that. And it's this question of what is the term that we should use to describe the nemesis we're facing, to describe this hydra. And sometimes we use terms like the New World Order. I still, and even I would say even with more frequency, use the term New World Order because our nemesis is now unironically using the term New World Order. So I think it's appropriate sometimes to use it as well. We sometimes use the term global homo. We sometimes use the term Zog. And there's this other term, this other abbreviation that many people are using, and it seems appropriate sometimes, but other times it gets people really riled up. It makes them a bit defensive. They don't like it, and they have some criticisms about the use of this term, some concerns about the use of this term. And the term is the global American empire.
The gay.
And gay, exactly. And I've seen that Gaddius Maximus made a live stream on his channel on Telegram not too long ago, and he was kind of riffing on this, and he came down on the side of being in favor of its use. So, Gaddius, let's start with you because you were kind of the inspiration for why I wanted to have you all on and talk about this. What do you feel about this term, the global American empire? Appropriate, inappropriate, fair, unfair? What say you?
I think it's very appropriate because it describes exactly what the regime on the Potomac is in the United States. I'm an American nationalist. I'm a patriot. I love my country, the United States. I hate to see what has happened to it. And we've got to have some type of term to describe what's going on. And I know that the provenance of the term globalist American empire comes from, it's popularized by Darren Beatty from Revolver News. And he's got a pretty big Twitter account, pretty big Twitter following too. And he's also Jewish. So there's a lot of people that it gives pause to talking about globalist American empire because it comes from a Jew. And also other people think, we're trying to hide the ball and not name the Jew. And that's the major criticism of it. They want to say you shouldn't use globalist American empire. You should use Zog. But I don't think we're not talking about the same thing when we're talking about the globalist American empire describes America. It describes the global hegemon right now. Zionist occupied government that's a generic term for pretty much any country that could have their government occupied by Zionists. And the thing is, Zog is a term from like the 1.0 days, like the WN 1.0 days, and it's seen as spicy and base to use it. And if you try to use globalist American empire gay, oh, you're cucky. It's like, no, you also got to try to convince people. You got to try to talk to normal people, try to get them on board with what we're doing here. And running around screaming about Zog isn't going to really get you anywhere. Even though it's accurate to describe America as a Zionist occupied government, but that's only one aspect of the empire. The government isn't the entire regime. You also have the media and academia and all these other institutions that aren't necessarily governmental. And honestly, the government really, it could be argued that the globalist American empire takes its marching orders from the media. So what's that? What are we're gonna call it? Zionist occupied media too? So we're talking about two different terms, is what I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a fairly concise summation, and there are certain aspects of that I agree with too. But let's get some of the others' opinions. So we've had an American give his perspective. Let's send it to an Englishman, Hwitgeard. What do you think about this question?
I'm split on the idea. I think that there is a good background for using gay of the global American empire, especially in light of what's happened with the Russia-Ukraine war. We see almost a return of the more of the sort of classic neocon warmongering type of power compared to what we've had in the past previous years with the global technocracy. So, but with this sort of return of the global American warmongering arm of power, it's I'm trying to think of how best to phrase this. With the war with Ukraine and Russia, there's definitely an attempt to try to push back any other power bloc in the world. You see the war of America pushing back Russia as that tries to grow in terms of being a global power bloc, especially as it's making connections with China now. And there's the whole issue with the Eurasian multipolarity thing there. But you're also seeing an attempt to try and dismantle the European Union as being a significant power bloc, not against America, but in competition with America, with the dismantling of Germany's power as a industrial powerhouse. That's pretty much put the European Union to bed now. So that essentially destroyed the European Union as being a power bloc at all. And that pretty much puts America back on top. It makes sure that America isn't contested by any other power bloc in the world. So in terms of talking of global power blocs, whether it's going to be Eurasian with America, whether it's Eurasian with Russia, with China, with Europe as its own European Union power bloc, or with America, America's really trying to make sure that it comes out on top as the global hegemon. But at the same time, the enemy which we're facing in terms of global power does seem to not have any particular location. It seems to be everywhere and nowhere. It doesn't seem to be within any particular national government. It doesn't seem to be situated within a particular group of people. It seems to be in between all these separate nodes of power, which are both governments and non-government entities, whether that's media, whether it's corporations. So in terms of describing who or what the element of power is, it seems to exist both everywhere and nowhere. And in that term, the GAE does seem to suggest that the seat of power is in America, which isn't true because the seat of power is everywhere rather than specifically in America. So it seems to be two different elements of discussion here. You have on the one hand, yes, America does seem to believe itself as being the ultimate power block above all of other governments in the world, and is really trying to implement that. And that's definitely the case with the Russia-Ukraine war. But on the other hand, the power that we're fighting against, and which seems to be currently holding the power in the world, does seem to have no particular location at all. So in short, there seems to be two different issues at hand, and each of those issues seems to give a good case for whether GAE is appropriate or not.
Yeah, I think that was, in particular, the fact that power is, I don't think it's a pyramid. It is a web, and there are many nodes on that web. It's definitely, I think, a fair analysis of the situation. And then our last perspective here, last but not least, going back to an American, Southern Nordic, what do you think about the use of the global American empire as a term to describe what is basically the final level boss that we are up against?
Well, let's see. Gaddius, he did an excellent job discussing the origin of the term gay, of course, by Darren J. Beatty, a proud Zionist Jew involved with Revolver News. I believe he coined it in 2020. See, I'll go ahead and explain my feelings on America, or Ameriqua, as I like to call it. I have very mixed feelings. I am not so much of an American nationalist. I am more of a regionalist. I'm concerned with Appalachia. Of course, I care about all my race that's all across this country and all across the world, but we have to try to look at our immediate surroundings, I believe. That doesn't mean we ignore each other in times of need and anything like that. Absolutely not. But as far as America goes, I absolutely detest our government. I have no love for the current regime or really any of the past regimes, to tell you the truth. I think my friend Patrick, I think he sums it up the best, which he is quite, you could say he's quite anti-American, but he has a point when he says that America is basically a Judeo-Freemasonic shopping mall. That's a term I've always found pretty funny. But of course, America is all I know. It's all I know. I've never traveled abroad. Now, going back to the terms gay versus Zog versus the NWO versus Globo Homo, all of these terms, there are definite truths, I believe, in each of these terms. Myself, though, I'm not really in favor of the global American empire term. I don't really like it. But just because I do not like something doesn't mean, of course, that there's not truth to it, because there is certainly a lot of truth to the term. The reason I'm not in favor of it is because I'm more in favor of the term Zog, to be honest. I know that's more generic, as Gaddius put it. And since he explained the origin of gay, I will explain the origin of the term Zog. An early appearance of the term was in a 1976 article, Welcome to Zog World, which was attributed to an American neo-Nazi named Eric Thompson, although Canadian white nationalists used the term Zog as well. It also features as the main theme in the 1978 book, The Turner Diaries, written by William Luther Pierce, founder of the National Alliance, a white nationalist organization. The term came to the attention of a larger audience on the 27th of December, 1984, in an article in the New York Times about robberies committed in California and Washington by a white supremacist group called The Order. According to the newspaper, the crimes were conducted to raise money for a war upon the United States government, which the group called ZOG, or the Zionist Occupation Government. But anyways, I'm more in line with the term ZOG, to be honest. But all of these terms, of course, they do have weight to them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess that's my piece to start out with there.
Okay, well, I think we've set all the pieces on the chess table now. I suppose I will add my 2 cents, my penny's worth. And I think that it depends on the situation. It depends on what it is you're talking about, what it is you're describing, what event has captured your attention and your hot take or whatever. So I want to address 2 aspects, 2 contexts in which I think the use of the term gay, the GAE, the Global American Empire, are appropriate. And I also want to say that I'm sure this is true for many people, but in my personal life, and even before I started making content for the internet, I considered America an empire. It's been the big superpower for the past century, more or less. It was certainly already getting to that status before it entered the Second World War. That's why its entrance into the Second World War was so influential, and obviously then since the war, it's been just unquestionably the big cheese. And I've also seen memes over the years where it'll show the Google search bar, like, how long do empires last? And it says, approximately 200, 250 years. And then the next image is the Google search bar, subtracting or doing the maths to see the age of the United States, and from 1776 being its sort of birthday. And so America's right on that time limit. And then it's like a crying child's face, like, oh no, we're reaching the expiration date of the American Empire. So I think what has caused people to get their hackles up is that, and it's 50-50. I mean, there's people who use the term, and it's not just what's his name, Darren Beatty over at Revolver. I mean, a lot of people are now using that term. But I think what gets people's hackles up is that they've added the global part to it. And so this is it's the misfortune of America. As we're all seeing the dystopic world that is being built in front of our eyes, as we are seeing the biggest overreach of power, and we're seeing the true nature of globalism, really, I think, has been revealed over the past 3 years. And as we're seeing the undeniable reality of the Kalergi plan or the protocols or whatever you want to refer to, it just so happens that America is the hegemon at this time. If I've said this many times, if we were living in the 19th century, being who we are now, with the values we have, and the things we stand for, and the objectives we have, we would be dissenting against the British Empire, most likely, as English speakers and as Englishmen like Hwitgeard. And so right now, America has the misfortune, I suppose, for Americans who dislike this term being thrown about, that it's the main player on the stage right now. But I think that just comes with the package. I mean, if you're with great power comes great responsibility. So it's just a fact of life that's how it's played out on the timeline of history. And so there's a reason why that America is the big, the head honcho. And so the 2 contexts, the 2 aspects I want to talk about as to sort of justify the term American Empire and even global American Empire are the interventionist aspect. Oh, I believe I've lost my internet connection. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Let
sir.
me know in the chat.
Yeah, we
We're-
can-
Okay, I just got an alert saying that I was down to one bar on the internet connection there. I might even have to check my VPN because I'm not seeing anything happening on Odyssey. And Spain, I'm in Spain, and Spain and Odyssey have a very bad relationship. So I might be blocked on Odyssey. So if I switch to a different country, I'll have to try that, see what happens. That might mean I pop out of the stream for a second. Anyway, so it's the interventionist aspect and then the cultural aspect. So let's first start with the interventionist aspect. It's not just in the Middle East. Like when we talk about Zog, and I agree with Gaddius that that can be a term that kind of puts people off. It might get you in trouble. There's a lot to explain behind it. It's not the best term perhaps for red pilling people if that's your objective. But it is true that in particular, along with banking, America's foreign policy, which is often very closely tied to its banking economy, is in the hands of other people. So, but the American interventions aren't just in the Middle East, around Israel's enemies, and interventions in areas where Israel comes out as the main winner, I suppose, the one who benefits the most. We've had interventions from America in South America, Latin America, in Far East Asia, in Indonesia, places like that. North Africa is one that really, I feel was disastrous. The intervention in Libya, and these interventions are often in order to uphold the superiority of the petrodollar, of the dollar. And if you read A History of Central Banking, the author of that book, Stephen Mitford Goodson, lays out very convincingly that most of these assassinations, most of these dictators that were removed, and the media and the Americans are all applauding. We saved the world. We took down a dictator. We brought freedom and democracy to these poor people, and God knows where. Really, all of that was to ensure that the dollar stays on top. And in particular, the removal of Gaddafi was about that. And that was disastrous, particularly for European countries and Southern European countries like Italy, where my family is from in particular. So that really, kind of annoys me, more than annoys me. So what do you guys think about this side of the American empire, and that it does behave kind of like an empire? It's not exactly going around conquering countries and planting its flag in their soil and, extirpating their native languages and incorporating them into the empire. But although the methods are different, the method of conquest is different, the end result is kind of the same. America has now a lot of vassal states. It installs leaders who they want, and it removes leaders who they don't want, so that they are the number one winner, and that they are the one that comes out benefiting the most. So, Gaddius, I'll throw it back to you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think American foreign policy is basically retarded. It's been retarded for a long time, So, yeah, that's part of that. I mean, that goes to global American empire. That ticks a box in that, but like you said, everything can't be chalked up to necessarily going back to benefiting Zionism or whatever. Although, like I've said, Zog is true. Like, I have no problem with the term Zog at all. I'm just saying, like, when we're talking about the regime, the full encompassing regime of the United States on the Potomac, the regime on the Potomac is a globalist American empire. So everything they do is to that end, to the end of the empire, to spread influence, basically just so they can export, goods or whatever, and import. They want to import the third world and export pox. That's basically the sole mission of the globalist American empire, in my opinion. And of course, there's heavy Zionist influence that goes along with that. So that's why I say, it takes off a mark in the GAE category.
Okay. All right. And Hwitgeard, what do you think about this? The fact that America is kind of conquering like an empire conquers. It is kind of intervening and imposing and controlling what its vassal states really get to do. It's sovereign over all, and that is basically what an empire is. So, what do you think? Is that a fair description, or is that being unfair to the Americans who are opposed to this term?
I'd say that's quite fair. You need to differentiate between those who are ruling the global regime and the actual and the machine of that regime itself. And regardless of who's at the helm, obviously we know at the helm it is definitely Jewish power which is leading that, but America is the arm which Jewish power is using. So it is definitely true that America is the machine, it is the regime, it is the power which global Jewish power is using. And then we still have the issue besides that of what if there are other elements besides Jewish power which are leading this global regime. And over the past couple of years with the technocracy, it does seem to be that there is quite a powerful Gentile element to the global power. So while Zog is a very descriptive term for who is leading the power, it also doesn't account for all the anomalies around that, which do involve a lot of Gentile power around that. And
yes,
that isn't to say that that because of that we should use GAE in order to account for the Gentile element of power, but it is that GAE does describe the actual machine and apparatus of the global regime itself. We know that the global regime is using America in order to use NATO to attack Russia. We do know that Israel uses America in order to destabilize the Middle East. So America is always the weapon that is used. It's the mechanism, it's the power, it's the center of international finance. And in that sense, GAE describes the mechanics of the regime.
You and I both, we've had plenty of debates in various group chats on Telegram, because I think you and I are on the same page in that, you know, yes, we're aware of the JQ, we're aware of the influence. It's not a surprise to us. No one, it's so funny when people, will say to me, or I've seen it often said to you as well, like, just say it's the you-know-who's, just say it, it's okay. Don't you know it's the you-know-who's? Don't you know it's this and that person?
We know it's the
Larry Fink at
you-know-who's.
BlackRock. And it's like, have you not, I'm not, I know I'm not the, most well-known content creator on the internet or in this, nationalist political sphere, but I've been around and I've been talking about this since 2018. I'm not surprised by this. And I think anyone who checks on your channel will also know that you're very woke on the JQ, but it's just that you and I think also our American friends here, we recognize that it's not only those you-know-who's that are pulling the strings. And it's not only that they have Shalos Goys. There are Gentiles of various European nationalities who are also in real positions of power and influence, and they are actively against us and our well-being and our future. And that's just a cold reality that we have to shiver around. But it is the reality.
It seems that,
go ahead.
It seems that as well as international power blocks, so whether that's America, Russia, China, Europe, there's also various power systems which work together, which do collaborate, but also seem to be vying for that global power. And Woodlander's comment that he's just made on YouTube has popped up as well. And this is something that I think I mentioned a statement around 2021. That, like Woodlander said, the real power is money, and we know who controls that. But this is a point of a lot of Jewish power circulates around the fact that their power comes from their monopoly on usury and finance, But what if there were other currencies besides finance, which can be used for the new world order we're moving into? Say, for example, if technology and then selling technology and selling data becomes the modern currency of the world, Jewish power is dominant as long as finance dominates the world. But if technology sweeps in and selling private data becomes the new currency of the world, then who's going to be the global powers who will use that as their form of currency? It does seem to be that Jewish power is very much dependent on finance being the currency of the world. But if anything else, like data, becomes a new form of currency, then that gives a new path for a new form of power to sweep in. But that isn't to denigrate or to dismiss Jewish power. It's saying that there's going to be other elements using other forms of power besides money.
Yeah, and then I think most people who have been paying attention and who argue in good faith with their interlocutors are aware of this. Finn Wraith had a comment here that I put up, and I'll put up again to read it out loud. He says, "I wonder if the real reason for this stuff, or at least one of the reasons, was causing these refugee crises, which plays a big role in the demographic shift in Europe." And that's going back to...
I believe. Oh,
sorry.
sorry. I was just going to say, I do certainly believe that Finn Wraith is right there. Certainly. I believe that is over time I've looked at it like anything that the elites, those that rule over us, anything they do, it accomplishes multiple objectives. So there's many benefits for them, many various benefits. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say that comment, I think, perfectly refers to what happened in Libya, especially. And there we saw an American intervention. And according to, again, the book I referenced earlier, A History of Central Banking, and also a very good guy on Substack who goes by Dissident Nomad. I'll find the link in a moment. He's been doing this long series on American power and the power of the dollar, especially, and how the dollar rules the roost. And he was just on Radlib's stream, I think like yesterday or 2 days ago. And he gets into this as well. So, there are two really good sources on this if you're interested. That's Dissident Nomad, Substack, and A History of Central Banking by Stephen Goodson. And they both postulate that the intervention in Libya was purely so that Gaddafi would not get off the petrodollar and create his pan-African currency and then reap the benefits of his resource-rich country. Now, what happens in the aftermath of American intervention, and the French were involved in this too, very involved. So we can criticize the French, and we don't have to, walk on eggshells and say, "Oh, it's the regime on the Champs-Élysées, it's the Macronites or something." No, we can just, for verbal economy, say the French and the Americans intervened, quote unquote, invaded, toppled Gaddafi, whatever. And the aftermath of that action, as Finn Wraith was saying, yes, it directly caused a flooding of the European continent, in particular the Italian peninsula, with specifically sub-Saharan quote-unquote migrants, because Gaddafi was the barrier to that. His Libya was the barrier to that, and he often said that. He said he even said it in the UN. He was up on the dais of the UN assembly saying, "If it wasn't for me, your nations would all be flooded with, the worst of Africa." And prior to the Franco-American debacle in Libya, well, I guess it wasn't a debacle for America because they preserved the superiority of the dollar. But prior to that, a few years prior, around 2008, Berlusconi, who was the premier of Italy at the time, and Gaddafi had pretty much come to diplomatic arrangement where Gaddafi was going to keep the hordes at bay. He was going to, strong arm, strong man, rule Libya and keep it that bulwark protecting southern Europe, which is then the gateway to the rest of Europe. And in exchange, Berlusconi's Italy would invest in Libyan development. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that the American empire, the global American empire, is an appropriate term depending on the context. Because if then 2 years later, 3 years later, America swoops in, removes Gaddafi violently, has him, removed violently, and then Libya descends into a hellhole, all hell breaks loose, and that bulwark is removed, and now the country that comes out suffering the most is Libya, but then followed directly by Italy, which is now getting swarmed with all these human traffickers and invaders. You're kind of, as a European and as an Italian, fully in your rights to say, F the American empire. So I'll throw it to you, Southern Nordic. What do you think about that? Because you were in agreement with Finn Wraith there. Is that something that you would say is an appropriate use of the term then in that kind of situation?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely an appropriate term because it's Gaddius and Hwitgeard both made excellent points. I was actually just thinking that in Hwitgeard, he took the words out of my mouth a few minutes ago. He said that America is the Jewish arm of power. They use America as a sledgehammer basically, and they have for well over 100 years now. Maybe even longer. But you were absolutely correct about Gaddafi. Gaddafi was an interesting character. And it's like you had just said, he had pointed out that he was the only thing preventing Europe from drowning in a brown and black horde, you could say. But my views on it are pretty congruent with Gaddius and Hwitgeard as well. While myself, like I said earlier, I tend to prefer the term Zog, but it's like I also said, all of these terms they all have credibility, of course. And there was a comment that I want to read in the chat just a minute ago, and I agree with it 100%. I'll take my stand said. Yeah, I'll take my stand said. It's not all the juice. If there were no juice, we'd have some big problems. White traders allow the juice to power. This is the crux of it. And this is a problem I think that a lot of American white nationalists, at least, if you want to consider yourself or a racialist, a lot of them they get hung up, I believe, on just, naming the you-know-who-ish tribe, which, of course, I'm not trying to alleviate or relieve any of the blame. They're certainly to blame, but if you examine what they call the JQ enough, eventually it's going to lead to the white question, to the Native European question. What is it that our own race's elites, what did they do to sell us all down the river? And I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole that you can that's many hours of discussion and consideration, you could say. Yeah, Tom Seaver brings up a good point. I see it on the screen here about the zombie ant fungus. That's a good explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, my views on it are. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go first.
Oh, I was just going to say my views on this are pretty well congruent with Gaddius and Hwitgeard. I don't really have a whole lot to add there. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, again, Zog is appropriate. We all know it's appropriate. I think it's about tact and strategy, when to use it. Like I said at the beginning, yes. I think there's a context for all of these. Getting your hackles up about which term to use. I've seen people on Telegram saying that the global American empire is an awful term because it blames America, as if America were blameless, which it's not. It just comes with the territory of being the superpower. You do some things right, you do something's wrong. We could say the same thing about the British Empire, the same thing about the Spanish Empire, the same thing about the Roman Empire. They had good things, they had bad things. Sometimes the scale tips one way or the other. But in certain contexts, Zog just isn't the best thing to use. I mean, you have to peel back so many layers. You have to, throw open so many curtains, to show what's going on backstage if you're going to only refer to that. And it can also, get you into serious trouble. And if you're, if that's something you care about, keeping your platform open and having your ability to talk about these things, that might matter to you. But I think it is an appropriate term in the right context, and that I think goes into the second aspect that I was going to mention, which is culture. So we've talked about the interventionism. We've talked about how America kind of is a 21st century, a modern style empire. It's not conquering land and planting flags and exterminating languages and peoples, but it's conquering in other ways. But then there's the cultural aspect of the American empire, the global American empire, in that it kind of exports itself. It exports pop culture. It exports kind of like the hollow, degenerate, pop culture that we come to associate America with. And I think if you live outside of America, you're more in this shadow than if you're in America. So let me first throw it back to Hwitgeard, who's in Europe, he's a European, and then I'll let the Americans respond to this aspect of America's cultural exporting of itself and kind of dominating, like how it sends in, Starbucks and McDonald's, and you see these popping up everywhere, and American rap music everywhere on the radio, and even countries in Europe trying to, like the French famously, trying to pass laws saying that every third song has to be in French. We can't just keep flooding the airwaves with American pop songs. So, Hwitgeard, what do you think about that?
I'd agree with that. I very much grew up in in Britain that was under America's shadow. I grew up through the 90s with a almost fossilized 80s upbringing, but throughout that there was very much an awareness of American films, American music, and it hadn't quite penetrated into the shops and a general mainstream culture at that point, besides just entertainment, television, films and whatnot. The actual streets themselves and everything hadn't become so Americanized. But in recent years, I've definitely seen Britain turning into a second America. In fact, in the city that I live in, there was a what's it called? We now have a Five Guys, and we have a Taco Bell, a fucking Taco Bell.
Wow.
Taco Bell in England.
Wow.
I remember when Domino's Pizza and Starbucks Coffee and came into, sort of like forced their way into the Italian market, and there was all this protest and bad reaction to that. And finally, this was I think Domino's came in about 7 years ago, and last year in 2022, after Domino's realized that they had failed miserably, the Italians weren't having any of their their crap. They shut up shop, packed their bags, and went back home. So yeah, it's just so funny to see some of these places. Like, you don't expect a Taco Bell in England, and you don't expect a Domino's Pizza in Italy, but there they are.
Well, the takeover of Taco Bell, of a Domino's Pizza, Pizza Hut, that came about 20 years ago in Britain. So we've been quite used to that for a while. And we've had lots of Starbucks, Costa, and Nero's opening up on every single shop corner now. All the independent coffee shops have been replaced with chains of Starbucks and Costa. It's almost like in York is quite a very historic town in Britain, and
yes,
it's famous for having lots of very old buildings there, and very old tea rooms. There's queues of lots of Chinese people lining up just so they can go into a very famous tea room in York, and they'll stand waiting there for an hour. But this is the thing, that the more Americanized things get, the more they're having a national tea room or a national local coffee shop becomes a novelty that people will happily queue up for because it's so rare and exceptional now. People are used to seeing all these American chains everywhere in the street, but it's just become completely passé. And everything that's national now becomes something of a curious novelty that impresses Asian tourists. It's a very surreal
It's also
to
kind of
see
like
it
how
like that.
it's kind of like how we know what beautiful architecture and beautiful city design is because it's where everyone wants to go on holiday. No one wants to go to the ugly modern new areas of a city, a historic city or a town. They want to go to the well-preserved medieval towns and cities. They want to go to authentic places, have authentic experiences. And yeah, it reveals the emptiness of modernity, but it also shows that these important cultural elements have been kind of reduced to tourist stomping grounds and novelties. So let's throw the question out to the Americans. What do you guys think about this cultural conquest, this cultural imperium of America?
That's where you get into globo-homo, right? Homogeneity. That's what globo-homo is. It's the process. So if you think about these four terms we're kicking around: NWO, Globalist American Empire, GAE, Zog, and globo-homo. Globo-homo is the process of it. NWO, that's the goal. New World Order is the goal for the overlords. Zog, Zionist occupied government, that's like the software that's operating every node of power. That's the software. And the globalist American empire, like Southern Nordic and like Hwitgeard said, was it's the sledgehammer. It's the biggest tool. It's the biggest tool that they're using to implement global homogeneity. And I gotta sympathize with you, Hwitgeard, about Taco Bell coming in. It's not even the cool Taco Bell from the 80s. It's the new ones that look ugly, like all the new fast food.
We never got the cool brick
man.
house, brick Pizza Huts or anything like that.
Yeah, the stucco. Oh man.
Yeah, that's global homo for you. So that's the process, and the New World Order is the end. And so that's I guess that's what you're referring to, the export of pause culture from the main tool in the in the network of power that we're trying to fight against, the system.
All right, Southern Nordic, what's your perspective here?
My perspective is very well and congruent with Gaddius's, and I also do feel it's a very sad thing seeing all of these huge corporations, coming into Europe. That's a very admirable thing that the Italians rejected Domino's Pizza.
Yes.
From what I see here,
it's a victory. It's a small victory. You can say it's a hollow victory. It's a symbolic victory, but I will take it. The fact that Domino's had to pack their bags, shut shop, and leave Italy, I took that as a win. I was so happy about that.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is I think it was back in the 70s. I believe there was a sort of movement amongst the Italians where they wanted to eat home-cooked, slow-cooked meals. None of this fast food bullshit that America exports. Yep. Yeah, and it was both during the years of lead, I believe even the communist side and the more fascistic side both encouraged Italians to do this as a rejection to Americanism. But going back to Americanism, we certainly are a military empire, absolutely. But when it comes to the cultural exportation, America is a bloated whore of an empire. And I mean, we see it, even here in extreme rural Appalachia, Dollar Generals. I hope y'all don't have those in Europe by chance, do you? It's like a little dollar store, a small retail store.
We have in Spain. This might be even worse than the incursion of Americanism, American culture. In Spain, we have these things called chinos. All of the like in the UK they'd be called a pound shop. In America, they're a dollar store, and here in Spain they're called chinos, where things are like really cheap. It's just Chinese tat. Everything's like under €5. But they're all run by Chinese people. It's just the strangest thing. It's so curious. Yeah, and that's why they're all called chinos. Like, I'm gonna go to the chino and buy I don't know, a Rubik's cube or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, we even suffer from this here in America. If you drive to any small town or smaller city, unless you know the geographical landmarks, it is basically indistinguishable from any other small American city. You know, unfortunately, these Dollar Generals, they spread like a case of the clap in a brothel. I mean, it's everywhere. I know. I seen a good meme the other day where someone said they had a picture of a Dollar General bag, and they said, I seen this Dollar General bag sitting out in my front yard. I went outside and yanked it up real quick before it could sprout a Dollar General. You know, in America, it's the corporatist consumerist culture that is a disaster. America, you know, back during the founding of this country, up in the 1800s, through the 19th century, early 20th century, people usually identified themselves by the state that they came from. Like me, I would be a Tennessean. I'd be a volunteer, as they call it. And there's America culture has one good aspect, and that is the little regional intricacies, you could say. Like here in Southern Appalachia, we also have, you know, Southern culture. It's similar to what we have here in Appalachia, but it's different. And, you know, it's also in the Midwest, the New England. You know, I can admire that, but it's just this corporate consumerist bullshit that's exported en masse. That's where the bloated whore of an empire comes from, in my opinion.
I think too, to play devil's advocate, I suppose, and defend America, I think that's also just a side effect, a symptom of modernity and late stage civilization. You know, the cycle of you know, a civilization rising, reaching its peak, reaching its, you know, most glorious moments, and then the downward slope, the decline. And we're very far along that slope. And so there's this hollowness and emptiness and consumerist mentality to the culture. And, you know, if America is the empire, and it is, you know, kind of in a declining phase, you might say, in many important ways, that I suppose is a symptom, a very visible symptom. You know, it's kind of also, I really, what you said, Southern Nordic, really resonated with me when you started talking about, you know, the Italian way of life and the way Italians in particular care about food.
Yes.
And this is something I've noticed, and I felt it as an American reshaping of Italian way of life. And that's why culturally too, I think that the term American Empire is appropriate in this context of a sort of cultural incursion. That it's, you have to understand too, I mean, this might seem strange to Americans, but in Europe, people really think Americans are cool, and America is cool, and they want to be like Americans. Italians love America. They love Americans. Then lots of Italians went to America, and so there's a lot of affinity towards American products, American way of life, American fashions.
Yeah.
And so America has this sort of rise and grind work ethic, the hustle culture. You know, it's, you know, we all know that Americans basically get like 6 days of vacation a year, and if you take them, you'll be made fun of. Like, what are you, a bundle of sticks that you need to go on vacation? You know, I just worked a double shift 2 nights in a row, and I don't ever take vacation. You kind of like, at least where I grew up in America, you know, there's the Protestant work ethic, I suppose.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to pop in there.
That's really important. And so it's totally different in European countries, particularly the ones that aren't Protestant, obviously. And what I saw when I moved to Italy, what I saw happening was that in front of me, in the years that I spent in Italy, the family meal, the slow food, then that's why that became an Italian movement, slow food. It started in Italy. Traditionally, women would stay at home and families would live together. it's true that there's economic reasons why young Italians don't move out and live on their own, but there's also cultural reasons for that. Most families don't mind staying together. And so you might have like the grandparents living on the ground floor of the house, and then somewhere, upstairs or off in, some other wing of the house are the parents, and then upstairs are the kids, and the family lives together. And the men would go to work, and the wives and the grandmothers would stay home and basically, home make. And come lunchtime, they would make a full, smorgasbord of home cooked food with natural local ingredients, because that's basically the essence of Italian food. Isn't, necessarily flair and, culinary aesthetic, feats like the French cuisine, for example, or something like that. Italians just pride themselves on really good local ingredients that are always, top quality. And then they make their favorite dishes. The men would come home from work, the kids would come home from school, and everyone would sit down and eat this meal together. And then, if necessary, the men would go back to work, or you were pretty much, done for the day. When I lived in rural France, that was also kind of the way of life. We would all have a healthy, home cooked meal together, drink some liqueurs, drink some pastis, and then have a nap. It was, that was the way of life. And then what I've seen happening, this was, going back, I saw this starting to happen around 2008, was that now both parents are working. They have to work. They're working longer hours. Only the kids are coming back home from school. The parents are still working. And so the kids are now having ready-made meals that they're popping in the microwave, or they're just cooking pasta because it's really quick and easy. Then they eat that, and then they go meet up with their friends, or increasingly they sit on PewDiePie's video gamer chair and stream with their friends, play video games, hang out on their phones. And guess what's happening now? Childhood obesity is a problem in European countries where it never used to be, like 10, 15 years ago, not even very, long ago. And I see that happening. It's like, and then because America's cool, they want to eat at the fast food restaurants that come to their countries. When I was a teacher in Spain, and I would ask my Spanish students, my young students were trying to get a conversation going. What's your favorite food? What do you like to eat? What do you do with your friends? Oh, I love KFC, right? KFC is his favorite food. McDonald's is his favorite food. And I would always just like die a little bit on the inside every time I heard that. So I'll throw it back to you guys. What are your thoughts on that?
That all sounds very, very familiar.
Yeah.
Like both of my parents worked, so they were always quite busy, but we still had quite a good family upbringing as well. But because of that, you could really tell that there was the convenience of meals which didn't involve a lot of preparation from raw ingredients. It was very common for families to do that, including mine. So it's something that I had to teach myself to be able to become or to cook my food entirely from scratch, get all the raw materials, and learn to cook properly, because it's something that most families weren't even brought up doing. Everything was already pre-made in convenience, and if it wasn't a fast food restaurant, which people went to, you still had all the ready-made frozen meals. And now you've got the merging of that sort of culture, where essentially you get ready-made KFC or ready-made things which are in sort of frozen food supermarket aisles. So now you've got a kind of overlap of two different elements of mass convenience.
And I will say too, in defense of English and British food more in a broader sense, it's actually very good. I understand why it has a bad reputation. I get it. But if you have a chance to get those home cooked meals like Hwitgeard was talking about, with local ingredients and the traditional food of the province or the region, British food, Irish food, is very, very good. There's some great ingredients, like, you know, Irish dairy, Irish beef is, I think, some of the best in the world that you could possibly ask for. But yeah, the problem is the British just don't know how to use what they have, or they've all substituted for easy stuff now.
Yeah.
Okay, so any final thoughts on this question of, should we use the gay? Should we use Zog? Should we use global homo? Any final thoughts on that?
Well,
I'll just say the rest of my piece on this is that because I'm an American nationalist and a patriot, I'm appealing to my fellow Americans, my, you know, people that I talk to day to day, and when I talk to them about what they want to know, what's going on, you know, they're good people. They're not very political or whatever, but they don't like to see what's going on. They don't like to see, like, you know, the ideology that's taken over everywhere. And you know, you got to approach people where they're at. So when that acronym of Globalist American Empire started gaining currency, I saw that and I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good inroad to talk to you know, fellow Americans. Look, this isn't what we want, folks. We don't want this globalization. We don't want this empire. We don't want to constantly be importing the third world and exporting LGBT to the rest of the world. This isn't, you know, what America stands for. And I think that's why I prefer. I mean, that, and plus I think it's more accurate. And I think also you talked about you know, it's people, patriots, people on my side of the thing will say, they'll get mad about, you know, you're saying it's America's fault. I'm not saying it's America's fault. I'm saying it's Americans' responsibility. My country is my responsibility. Whether, you know, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for leaving my country better off than when I was born into it, or for my kids, for my descendants, you know, for my grandchildren or whatever. So yeah, I don't have a problem saying this is jacked up. It's the globalist American empire, and we got to fix this, right? So that's why I use that. But yeah, that's pretty much my piece on the acronym debate.
All right, great. Southern Nordic?
Well, I think I've made it fairly clear where I stand on this. All of these terms have a lot of credibility, you know. I still stand by, I guess, you know, using the term Zog, but of course that also limits, that also handicaps the accountability of our own racist elites here in America that have, you know, sold us all down the river. The NWO, it's basically, you know, it's a term that's always been used by the elites. It's like their pet project. People like, I believe, H.G. Wells used it. Henry Kissinger. I remember being a kid and seeing President George H.W. Bush on a speech on the news mention the New World Order, and I remember my grandparents saying, you know, we don't want that shit, you know.
Yep.
You know, just a quick question I might have for y'all is, what do y'all think about, say, the Eastern version of globalism, perhaps like China, Russia, you could say, or Eurasianism?
Yeah.
You know, globo homo is a term that we can certainly apply to Western globalism. You know, the promotion of, you know, hey, let's go bomb Iraq here and turn their children into trannies, you know. So globo homo, though, isn't really a term that you can use to describe the Eastern version of globalism, at least just not yet. I was just curious, what do y'all think about the idea of Eurasianism? I don't think it's good for our race, regardless. I look at it as we don't really have anyone looking out for our interests. You could say, as white or Native European working class people, we have nothing. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't mean to kind of derail that. I was just curious about it. What do you think?
I think that's a good point you made too. I think the traitor is always worse than the enemy. and we do have lots of traders. Going back to the Dissident Nomad Substack, I was perusing that, and he talks about a not insignificant detail. Every president of the World Bank, except one, has been an American, and not always a Judeo-American, like proper American. Every president, except one, of the World Bank, and every vice president, every number two of the IMF has been American as well. There's some really interesting details. I really recommend people check out that guy's Substack. Hwitgeard, you've got some really good views on Eurasianism, the whole Russia question. Where should we fall on that? And I think this will actually be a good segue, both what Other Nordic was talking about, people feeling more affinity, more identification towards their state back in years gone by in the United States. So I think we've got a good segue here for the next topics. But why don't you, Hwitgeard, give a little response to Southern Nordic's question there?
Oh, well, I absolutely agree with his points. I'm very much against globalism as a whole in everywhere, and that's not just the powers of, well, that's not just having globalism impact us. I'm very much against the idea of our impact on the world as well. I'm very much a view of, I don't like empires. I'm very much I believe in smaller sovereign states that represent the national interest of particular people. This is why when it comes to the issue of Russia-Ukraine, I've been very neutral on that and tried to be as neutral as possible. But in terms of supporting Ukrainian independence, yes, I very much agree that they should be an independent ethnic people who should be able to defend their own existence as a group. And what people may say, they aren't really a true ethnicity. Who are these people to define what is a true ethnicity? If they want to segregate themselves as a people, then they should have every right to do so and have that independent power. Obviously, that comes to into the complications of how they're going to do that, and obviously in practicality rather than being more idealistic. In practicality, that involves America using them as their own puppet. But in terms of nationalistic ideals, every nation should be able to defend its own interest as a sovereign state for its people's interest, and that involves Catalonia in Spain as well. They should be a independent people. Same with Scotland as well. But on the other hand, there's the issue of would that make the nation state weaker if they did secede? So
okay, so hold your horses. Whoa, because that's exactly what I want to get into. But I want to make sure that we don't leave any detail behind. Yeah. So, and I have this arranged. I don't know how long you guys can stay for. It's getting a bit late here in Europe, but if we can go for like another hour, I've got this structure what I want to get to first and what I want to get to after, because one leads into the other, I think, in the way that I've got it in my notes and in my head.
Well, I'm stepping ahead too far on the themes, but I think in general, I support national sovereign states. I'm very much against empires, and a nation should be able to have their own sovereign interests as a people along ethnic lines.
Well, I'm on that same side as well. That's where pretty much I come down. Now, it's another current thing. Like I said, we're going to talk about some current things that have been occupying people's minds, and back and forth on Telegram, especially. This isn't so much a current thing. I suppose it's a current thing because I've been talking about it a lot on my channel, on all my live streams that I do on Thursdays. We've been talking about this. And then also Greg Johnson and Gregory Hood have been getting involved in this question as well. So I think it's also a timeless question. It's an important question given the context of the conflict in Ukraine, and where people stand on the issue is going to be dependent on where they stand on what we're going to talk about now. So let's talk about ethnocentric nation states, ethno-nationalism basically, versus superstates, versus imperium, to use Yaki's term. And in particular, the white superstate, or the white imperium. There seems to be two camps on this, and I've fenced with the people who come down in the second camp of pro superstate, pro white superstate, pan-European sort of unification, an imperium a la Yaki. And I'm on the other side of that issue. So let's get into this. Let's see, who would like to start? Who's got an itchy trigger finger would like to talk about this? Hold on. How's your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Okay, all right.
Basically, well, we had a chat about this. I think it was last week or the week before, and basically my feeling about it is I'm against empire, imperium. Defense could be made for it, as worldwide white solidarity with each other, and like a defensive pact or whatever, to basically just turn the entire white part of the world into like its own realm or whatever. And the imperium talk, I think, is just grandiose. It's basically trying to like reinvigorate like people's sense of, we got to reclaim our destiny, we got to do something cool, like we're dying as a civilization, we got to get our act together, so we're gonna make a big empire and reconquista all of our territory. And it's sort of, I think it's like a motivational tactic, but it also has like the reason for it is just because we see everything going on, and our lands are being flooded with third worlders. And I really do sympathize. I sympathize with the people that talk imperium. Like, I see where they're coming from, but that's not the answer. Like, empire isn't the answer. Empire has pretty much, in my opinion, run its course through history. We see what happens with empire over and over again. We've run this experiment many times, and it never turns out great. So I think nationalism is where it's at. It's like the natural order. There, you got people that'll tell you, oh, nationalism is just a recent development in the history of man. Not really. You can call them tribes, you can call them whatever you want. Like, nationalism is the natural order. People of a like kind in a specific territory, playing by their own rules and culture and mores and all that. That's the natural order of humanity as far back as recorded history. So, nationalism, it's tried and true. Ethno-nationalism, whatever you want to call it, but empire, it's unnecessary now, I think.
You there, Pox?
Pox seems to be muted at the moment.
Yeah, I think he's muted. I was about to say, if you wanted to go ahead, Hwitgeard. I'm not trying to step on Pox's toes.
Okay. Following on from what Gaddius was saying, there's definitely a lot of good basis for empire, especially when any seceding state from that empire would essentially weaken it and then make it so unstable that it would eventually collapse. But at the same time, ethno-nationalism is the main basis for what a state is formed of. It's formed of a national interest by a people expressly for the existence and continuity and posterity of that people. So it starts out as being tribal groups, and eventually those tribal groups are going to coalesce into a larger group, and that's going to become a nation. But at that point, that nation is going to break apart again, and then form new tribes, and new nations are going to develop out of that same group. So you're still going to have the development of new nations of nations. Our current national boundaries and borders aren't always the way they've been. They've changed greatly over time, but at the same time, they've always been, well, up until a very recent time, nations have been along ethnic lines. They've been founded around a unification of a particular ethnic people. So, yeah, while that empire may eventually collapse and then merge into new separate nations, those nations should be and have previously been along an ethnic line because they are specifically for that ethnic interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had to mute my microphone and pop out for just a second there, but I am back now. Okay, so the Nordic. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, I'll talk a little bit about the man, Francis Parker Yockey. I find Yockey to be a very interesting historical figure. He's kind of controversial, I suppose, in these circles. I've heard some people say, that he was a communist. I think I've heard Thultide say this. I disagree with this, to be honest. He's a very interesting character. I have to admit, though, I have never read Imperium. I've heard it can be a kind of a difficult book to read, but I am interested in what Yockey has to say. But the idea of Imperium itself, I am thoroughly against it. Or just the idea of empire. I don't think that it's healthy, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see today is the culmination of, centuries of empire building, you could say. Everything is mixed together. Everything is standardized. And, you could call me, an ethno-nationalist, which I suppose that I am. But I find, and I think this is something me and you had spoken briefly about, Pox, was that I consider myself more of a tribalist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I believe that Dunbar's number is a very real and true phenomena, and if you're in a global or a huge society, I think Dunbar's number states that, in ancient European history, that tribes, when they would get to be about 250 to perhaps 350 individuals, they would break apart. They would split usually, because, what would you call it? I guess the human mind, you could say, has limits on just how many people it can know,
I think there's a term, egregore, in like esoteric sort of mystery school thinking.
Really?
The egregore. It's not the hive mind, but it's like the mind of the people, the collective mind of the tribe. And that's basically what produces their culture, their art, their mythologies, their narratives. And that's why everyone from that particular tribe has the same kind of artistic or narrative expression, because I think the term is the egregore.
Oh, that's fascinating. I wasn't aware of that term. That's really interesting. But I think the days of empire are honestly over. I mean, it's certainly been over, you could say, because our empires, as you could say it, certainly aren't our own.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really have a say in it. We are just subjects, you could say, vassals or serfs, slaves.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just my thoughts.
Well, also, it's one thing to praise the empires that your countries have built in the past, like the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire. But at the same time, it's a whole different issue entirely when you become the vassal state of a larger empire. And then you realise that it's one thing to own it or be part of it, but when you're subservient to the empire to the point in which it goes against your national interests, then you start to see the problems of imperium. But you become a victim of empire rather than having it as a sign of pride.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a comment that I put up earlier, and I'm going to look for it again, and because I think that we're all on the same side as far as, we want a place for every race. We want the ethnic peoples of the European race, the white race, to be successful, healthy, thriving. And so we understand that sort of an empire can put that in danger, even though it might be glorious and epic and wonderful for those in control of that empire. And then I think Gaddius made some good points about, the positive vision, something to strive for, and also this was something that Greg Johnson said in response to Gregory Hood. There's a time and a place for these things, and we do have to realize that every white man and woman, every European man and woman, whatever they are, is under attack, is on the chopping block. And so, as Oswald Mosley said in his time, looking at the threat from the East and the West, sort of putting Europe in a pincher, there was no time for petty nationalism. All of Europe had to unite as a race, as a big bloc, Europe, against the Red Terror and, again, talking about the American Empire, against the Yanks, to be honest, in the way he saw it. But I go a step further now. I go a step further than Greg Johnson in his essay and in his positions. And this is something that's been on my mind for about a year now, in particular because of what the mask off that we've seen coming from the global elite, the globalist intentions, the dystopia, the prison planet, the Abrahamic religion, two in particular, I suppose, maybe all of them, the fulfillment of end times prophecy of every knee bowing and every tongue confessing to the worship of one world religion, the mixing of all the nations up until they're eradicated. Basically, they don't exist in any substantive way that we know them as now. All of that really sits very badly with me. I don't want any of that. I want nothing to do with that, and I don't want to have a world where that is the future, or increasingly the present. And so I've started to entertain the idea of even supporting secessionist movements, independence movements. And so I want to look at this comment just one more time. Denny Lambea says, the US was a pan-European white ethno-state. I know, half my life was spent there. I'm going to disagree slightly, because I don't think the US, while it was white, I don't think it was ever an ethno-state. I think it was a racial state. But going into the subcategory of ethnos, I don't think so. Maybe except for when it was mostly Englishmen. But the second and even though they were Europeans, but the second other Europeans started coming in, Germans, Irish, Italians, Poles, and as soon as they came in with other religions, Catholics, Puritans, all this stuff, and when they were no longer in their own rural areas, well separated from whatever the Catholics were doing over there and whatever the French were doing down in the South or the Midwest, and whatever the English were doing in their corner of, northeastern America, when they all started having to live in close quarters, that's no longer an ethno-state, because those are different ethnic Europeans with different languages, different cultures, different customs. And it doesn't fit the definition of ethnos, or of nation, which are synonyms, basically, that Herodotus gave us, which is that in order to be an ethnos, in order to be a nation, you need to have shared blood, first and foremost, shared religion, shared customs, and shared language. And so I'm thinking about all of that, and I'm looking at the European, particularly, political map, but I'm also thinking about, what is the salvation for white Americans? in their anti-white current paradigm. And I have to be honest, I think secession and independence movements could be the ticket. But this gets really, like I mentioned, how I've had to duel with some imperium types who think that, a Europe of small nations is suicide, it's too idealistic, whatever, which I also disagree about that. And Greg Johnson makes some good points about that as well in his essay, which I recommend everyone read. It's on countercurrents, of course. But this position of mine gets even more people raising their eyebrows, because we all know that most of the independence movements in Europe are totally paused. They are rotten. The SNP, the Scottish independence types, they're awful. The in Spain, the Catalan independence movement or movements, they're awful. They are infested with Antifa. They're funded by George Soros. It's like you couldn't ask for a worse gaggle of villains. But I don't think they're wrong in their motivation. I don't think it's wrong for the Scottish to want to be independent. I don't think it's wrong for the Catalans to want to be independent of their nation state, of their political entity that we know today, whether it's the United Kingdom or Spain. I don't think the German speakers in northern Italy are wrong to want to be independent. I don't think the northern Italians are wrong to want to break away from the south of Italy. I'm theoretically in favor of all these things. And I think the right, the nationalist right, is kind of still in Oswald Mosley mode, where we need to have big super states and to take on the Reds and the Americans, whatever. And now I'm thinking, actually, the threat is global homogeneity, as Gaddius mentioned earlier. And I'm wondering if the solution or the antidote or the resistance to that, because there's no escaping it anymore, there's only resistance now. I'm wondering if the resistance to that is independence movements, is secession movements. And I'm wondering if that could even happen in America. I wonder if maybe the South could rise again, really, not just as a meme, not just as a dream. I wonder if Idaho and Montana and the Dakotas could say, we don't want any more of this pause going from the coastal elites. We want to secede. Like, let's make it happen. And I wonder if the right is just too stuck in the paradigm of patriotism for the flag, the Constitution, the arbitrary lines on the map, institutions like royal families here in Spain or in the United Kingdom. And instead of actually seeing that there's some really fertile ground on this land of independence movements and secession movements, but we've ceded that all to the left, instead of actually getting involved in this issue and maybe introducing some more reasonable, right-wing, properly nationalist perspectives. What do you guys think about that? Feel free to respond, whoever has a response.
I go back and forth on it.
I think, like, sometimes I'll think, fuck it, sorry for cussing on your stream. Sometimes I think, screw it, we should just, secede. We should have a national divorce. Was a big meme there a couple years ago, being pushed by, like, mainstream politicians here in America, like a national divorce between, like, the libtards and the conservatards or whatever, red and blue. I'm for that, that's fine. But then other times, I think, like, you look at pictures of like Santa Monica from 1960s, and it's like it's like a Beach Boys album. You got all these like fit, good looking white people in Santa Monica Beach just cruising down the beach or whatever, and that's all gone now. So it's like it's all fat Mexicans, and like it's like it, and I think about that, and it makes me mad, and it makes me think, look, that needs to be fixed. That needs to be reconquered. I don't want to give up on that. I guess it's just something that it really like tugs it. It really tugs at like the American patriot's heart, I suppose. But as far as secession is concerned, I think like the ticket is going to be like the bigger that so the regime is the most powerful it's ever been, but it's also the weakest it's ever been. Increasingly, it's going to have less and less power to impose its will on locales. Like people are just going to be dropping out. There's a big movement in Idaho and Oregon and Washington to secede into a state called Greater Idaho or whatever, and that's gaining some traction. There, Idaho is it's becoming like the white nationalist state in America.
Yeah, I've been keeping my eye on Idaho. There's some really interesting things going on there.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is the locusts are already starting to swarm in there.
Yep.
The housing prices are skyrocketing. A bunch of Californians are moving to Idaho now, and it's like there's no escape. So it's going to be like something's going to have to give. We're going to have to claim sovereignty somehow, and I think secession is one avenue. Like I don't want to see. I want like. The way America's set up, the way America's supposed to be set up, before the Civil War, after the Civil War, federalism pretty much went down the drain. But the way America is supposed to be set up is like Southern Nordic was talking. Everyone's supposed to be from their own state, and that's pretty much what America was conceived as. Some people think like it was just the founders were just kicking the can down the road on sovereignty because they didn't want to go one way or the other on monarchy or like a unitary federal power or whatever. But I think there's redeeming qualities to federalism. I think if properly understood and executed, it can work. Because what are we talking about? We're talking about like groups of people on one territory making their own rules and doing their own thing. So part of me wants return to federalism, another part of me wants national divorce, another part wants to secede, another part just wants to reconquer the entire country so white people can chill in Santa Monica again. But I don't know, man. I'm leaning towards national divorce. I think. I mean, you got a country with roughly two groups of people that have nothing in common. There's no common destination for us. So it's like, what are we even doing? Just trying to impose our will on each other. So that would be my take.
And it does seem like nothing seems to happen nowadays. Like there was a time in history where these things seem to be a bit more, I wouldn't say frequent, but at least possible. Like things happened, and it just seems like now we're just slowly marching like zombies to this global homo future. And it'd be like, I think it'd be nice if people actually started agitating for this in the real world, not just reacting. Because I like what you were talking about, Gaddius, about a positive vision for white people, for European people. And I think that nothing could be more positive and more epic and more Faustian than resisting this Hydra, this, final level boss that has such dystopian intentions, resisting that and actually breaking away from its clutches and saying, no, we are going to break away. We're going to form our own nation. We're going to have our own sovereignty. And going back to Yaki defines sovereignty as being held accountable to no one, being able to do what you want and being held accountable to no one. And I think that's a good definition. And basing our nation on the Herodotus definition, people with the fundamentals in common, not Nigerians and Moroccans and Hondurans who have the same passport. People who have actual shared blood and shared language and shared customs. And I think there's a comment here that I wanted to highlight. Again, from Finwright says, movements of Europeans who do not have their own countries are full of anti-whites. I have heard Sami people and Karelians here in Finland and Scandinavia argue that they're not white and they are victims of racism. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And that's the shame, that's the pity that I'm saying, is that the right has left this stage to be occupied by the worst actors. This sort of thing happens in Spain as well. All of the separatist movements in Spain, whether they're the Basques or the Catalans or in Galicia, they're really rotten. The people involved in them they're not, concerned. I mean, there is a good side to them. I do, I know some Catalans who are just really concerned about, this, that they don't want their language to die out. They're really proud of their language and they're proud of their history. But then there's the Antifa types and there's the Soros funding and all that stuff. So that's what I'm saying, is that I think a positive vision for Europeans, something that we can actually start, even in my view, real life, real world political organization, having an objective, not just complaining and reacting, but actually going forward with an objective, is independence movements, secession movements, and in particular in Europe, there's already a lot of precedent for that, even currently. And I'm, again, in the American case, I think there's some interesting things going on in Idaho. So who'd like to jump in on this?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting talking about Herodotus, especially because in his histories, he really tried to emphasize the importance of ethnic unity in Greece, because you had the constant conflict previously with Sparta and Athens, but Greece really came together to unify against Persia. And that's the point that Herodotus really tried to emphasize, that despite the differences in different nation states across Greece, there was such thing as a national unity and a national identity. And that was a background of Herodotus' histories. But that sort of alliance, especially in terms of talking about we need to have white unity, which of course is a very important thing to have, but it's always temporary for a particular time period. When people talk about the importance of not breaking up nation states because we need to have white unity in order to fight our enemies.
Right. They'll say China, there's nothing that China would love more. There's nothing that Russia would love more than, small, independent, ethnocentric nations in Europe. Yeah. And I always just think, well, there's nothing stopping us from forming alliances once we have sovereignty. Like, we're not just going to be sitting ducks in in our own little private ponds. We can actually form our own blocks. And I've mentioned this before, that there was even talk of this actually sort of happening, not quite as, as extreme as secessionist movements and independence movements, but there was talk that the Visegrad Four and Italy, when Lega and Salvini were calling the shots, that they were going to form an anti-EU bloc and really be a thorn in the side of all of the EU's plans for replacement immigration and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, because when nations have more sovereignty, they can make their own decisions. And that could be one of the decisions that nations make, is that we're going to make our own alliances and carry on that path.
Exactly. Having an alliance is something which can be done organically and naturally, but that doesn't mean having to blend all the nations together and then losing any sight of ethnic differences that define who we are and define our own culture, which we have. Because once you start mashing all the different white nations together, it doesn't bring in the best of one. It just merges them to the point in which things end up, no offense to the two Americans, but it ends up like America. You end up having that sort of globalized culture. It stops having that flair of localism. And that's why I'm very pleased with Southern Nordic's description of having tribalism, because that sort of tribalism does preserve the local values of certain parts of America. It stops it from blending into that Californian homogenized mass of just nonsense.
Some people have been very upset about this. I don't understand why. I don't think it's a very controversial or offensive take of mine, but it's been a take of mine for years. I've said this for years, that in my experience, in my observations, European countries are becoming more like America. The European Union is kind of like a second version of America. The idea that you are of a nation because you have a passport or because you were born on the soil, that idea is creeping into a lot of European countries. There are activist groups in European countries trying to change the citizenship laws to change from being based on blood to being based on you're born on the country's arbitrary lines. You're now a citizen. You're now just as English as me. You're just as Italian as me, whatever. And again, like you said, not to offend the Americans, and I don't think the American guests we have on today would be offended. I think that we can see looking at what America is today, yeah, the mixing of all these different peoples isn't a good result, and you don't really end up with a nation anymore. And I think Europe is on that trajectory, and it would be nice if some people saw that and didn't have on rose-tinted glasses or didn't get offended about the cold realities that I talked about earlier, but we actually just stuck to our principles and stuck to what's important. For me, what's important is the survival and thriving of the unique, distinct, and genuinely diverse European nations, European peoples. Southern Nordic, why don't you jump in?
All right, so I agree with the things that Hwitgeard and Gaddius had said. I can also understand Gaddius's perspective, about being sort of conflicted on this. He mentioned the what you could say the beach days at Santa Monica. California at one time was a very beautiful, and there was a lot of prosperity, but it also had a lot of hope, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But that ship has sailed, in my opinion. People talk about the 1950s. I think the 1950s were just our fleeting reward for killing our own in the Great War, in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as secessionist movements and stuff, I did a little bit of digging into this last night. I had no idea that Europe had as many separatist or secessionist movements. Like, there is an amazing list. I mean, it's huge. Here in America,
yes, that's what I've been saying.
I mean,
there's actual
everywhere.
Fertile territory here.
Yeah, Europe is. Oh man, it's like I don't know what holds Europe together sometimes. I mean, I was just shocked. But at least here in America, as I like to call it, I just wrote down a statement as I was listening to the other guys. I said, if we continue at the current trajectory here in America, if we continue at this current trajectory, our people, the native Europeans, whatever nation of Europe they came from, our people will face a death from 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. Separatist movements or secessionist movements may turn bloody and violent. There is always that distinct possibility. But my question to everyone is it better to go out in a blaze or to just fade away? So I think that, regardless, if things continue, if America chugs along with its, just current iteration, we're going to be gone within a few generations. I hate to say that. Maybe not completely gone. I mean, it's already going out the door. Just a list of a few American sort of secessionist or separatist movements. One of the most popular, like Gaddius was referring to, is, Cascadia up there in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if Cascadia was necessarily what I would consider a lot of our guys. But there was the Northwest Territory Imperative. That's one that was more aligned to racialism. There's also the Confederate States of America, people like the League of the South. Now, as far as the South goes, I hate to say this because I love Southern culture. I'm in Appalachia. It's different. We call people over in like Middle and West Tennessee or in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, we call them flatlanders around here. But I work in Northwest Georgia. I drive a truck, and man, it's being flooded with Hispanics, with Mexicans. And I mean, there's a decent African American population down there. The South is, I hate to say it, I don't have at its current, and I'm not saying this to, shit on the South or anything, but it's just, it's the proximity. I mean, Mexican, I mean, there was 200 and some thousand migrants that crossed the invaders that crossed the, southern border this year. I mean, it's all about proximity. There was Deseret or Desiree. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Forgive me, but it was like a Mormon secessionist movement. And, there's regions of, the Midwest. I would love to see an Appalachian secessionist movement or New England, but yeah, I'm in favor of secession. It just falls in line with my sort of tribalist idea, I guess, Anyways,
Sure.
uh,
I just want to add, because you said you didn't want to be coming across as shitting on anyone. Again, I don't think it needs to be said, but we're not here to do that. We've been talking about this term, the gay that gets some people's hackles up. We've been talking about the problems that are happening in the homeland of Gaddius and Southern Nordic, but also in the homeland of myself and Hwitgeard. I believe that we have to be honest about what's going on, and we can't be
Yeah.
sentimental about institutions, constitutions, flags. I don't like flag waving, hollow civic nationalist
me
patriotism.
neither. Me neither.
And so it's not like
Sure.
we're shitting on a particular area or particular people. We're trying to find solutions for those people and
Yes.
and those areas.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to throw in too, like I said, I mentioned I work in Northwest Georgia. I drive a truck, but sometimes I have to go to schools. And I've seen the memes before. I've seen the memes, like I guess taken at elementary schools, perhaps in England or Sweden or Germany or wherever. And I go to these elementary schools, and it reminds me of this meme. I will see one blonde-headed Native European kid in a sea of a brown and black mass. It's happening here in the South. Miscegenation, I hate to say it, but miscegenation, I swear that part of northwestern Georgia, every white boomer grandparent I see has a kinky-haired mulatto grandchild. It never ends. I mean, I don't know if it's the love of college football or, it's just, something's got to be done, The white
That's
man
why
is going to be gone.
we're trying to fight the information war. We're trying to fight the propaganda war. It sounds cliche, the ideas war, but yeah, the fact that people are doing that kind of thing, and I do think it is a particularly more American problem, just by dint of the vast numbers of different peoples that live in America. That it's a disaster that's going on there, and it's not because it's motivated by hate that we're saying that. I think most people of all races realize that actually, no, we don't want to mix all together and lose what makes us who we are. But everyone's being propagandized into it. Hwitgeard, you had a comment you wanted to add.
It was just at the end of the previous point that I made before. Mainly just to round it off. But it was to add that while it's all fine and well to talk about the homogenization of the world, especially global homo, of multiracial multiculturalism, so the mixing of Africans and Arabs into European countries. But few people talk about the problem of monoracial multiculturalism, about the blending of all whites together into a bland, cultureless mass that lacks any localized or nationalized differences. And this is one of the problems of empires, as we've been talking about, is that it does seem to level out and destroy any of those particular particularities and localized differences. It seems to destroy those things by leveling all those groups together into one homogenized mass, and it's that sort of thing which kills culture. And while it may create new cultures which evolve out of that new mass, it kills so much in the process.
And this is why I've been really entertaining the idea of independence movements, particularly in Europe, in the context of what we've seen happening over the last 3 years and just how big the globalist designs have become. But I started, thinking about I've been calling them proto-globalist creations, entities, schemes, and some of these modern nation states that we're familiar with fit that description. And when I think of Italy, for example, and the consequences of Italian unification, I know people, they're very elderly, well, some of them not that old actually, who grew up at a time where they were punished with corporal punishment for speaking their dialect in school because the Italian nation state wanted everyone to be speaking Florentine, Tuscan Italian. And some of these dialects in Italy, dialect is a misnomer. These are different languages. They're different languages. If you get someone from Milan talking in his dialect to someone from Sardinia, they're not going to understand each other. And the Italian peninsula is rich with dialects. There's dialects in every province that are quite different to, maybe not the province next door, but certainly the region next door. And when you think about people, Italian kids not too long ago, a few decades ago, getting corporal punishment because they were caught speaking their dialects with one another, like, what does that sound like to you? It sounds like the pathway to like we were saying, the destruction of local character and what makes European people so genuinely diverse, and that rich tapestry of this continent and her people. And so I'm looking at present day and thinking how much of that is being lost, and that's the same situation in Spain. Like the importance of language in people's identity and how intensively they will fight to protect it. I mean, the language issue is really important in Catalonia, and I see it, and I sympathize, even though their movements might be full of infiltrators and bad actors. I sympathize with their desire to protect their language, to keep it living, to use it. And I sympathize with the Italians who grew up being punished for using their dialects. And it's younger Italians these days they don't know their dialects. It's been kind of phased out. That's really sad. That's a shame. So yeah, I think you're right that we can't also just give white homogenization a pass, and that's why I don't believe in a white superstate or anything like that, because that will happen. If you had a white imperium, which talking about idealistic and unrealistic, I think the white imperium is the most unrealistic position.
Yeah.
We're on our knees right now with a gun at our temple. We're not having an imperium anytime soon. But if we were to have one, a very, very quick consequence of that would be, the crushing of local cultures that don't fit into the scheme of the imperium.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Staying on the secession theme, do you think there has to be like population, and it has to have some sort of it has to make sense in a geographical sense, what's the minimum requirements for a secession movement, would you think? Because I mean, you could get towns, you could get down to the town level, you'd get to a block, and then it would just become sort of ridiculous. You'd be we'd be unironic libertarians. Everyone has their own sovereignty, a nation of one or whatever. So I'm just wondering if what the panel thinks, whether there's a minimum requirement. I'm thinking around there's 8 billion people on Earth right now, but I think 1 million or 500,000, and it has to make sense geographically. It has to be an area that you can't just gerrymander this or that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
that's what's complicated about the American situation, is the divide between rural and urban in the same state. It's like maybe the state of Idaho wants to secede, but the people in the bigger towns, the bigger cities, they actually like their their global homo hipster cafes and LGBT school lessons and things like that. So it gets complicated. What do you guys think? Oh, what's happened?
Can you repeat the actual question? Sorry.
Gaddius was asking about how does secession work when you have such big populations? What's it going to be based on? Is it a geographical area? Is it something else? There's 8 billion people in the world, so how can a smaller group of people secede in such grand big populations?
Well, I think a lot of other such groups tend to form organically. So normally these separate secession groups will they'll have their own sort of grouping, and sometimes they can cross geographic lines. Like, for example, you've got Basque, and the Basque people seem to exist half in France, half in Spain. So you've got a whole ethnic identity with a whole ethnic language, and they seem to exist between two different nations entirely. So sometimes these ethnic groupings will develop a lot more organically than just pure geography or just pure other sort of factors involved in that. But in terms of how they're going to achieve it, well, they need to form their own new groups and new communities. They need to start buying from each other and selling from each other to develop a much more interconnected system with each other, in order that they aren't becoming too dependent on the system that they're trying to escape from, or at least separate themselves from. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that they can become as independent as possible. So that involves having their own farmland in order to produce their own food. And then doing that, they can at least have that sort of cooperation of that ethnic group. And I'm not sure, actually. I'd like to hear what the Nordic could say. And it's one thing to be able to separate themselves from the country that they want to separate themselves from, in terms of developing the independence of that particular nation. But in terms of actually codifying it in a legal way, how would they officiate that secession? I'm interested to hear.
Oh, I was about to say that is a very it's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I've got any answers on that per se. But I do agree with what you said, Hwitgeard. We have to. It's the idea of, in my videos, I call it the cold revolution. It's just where you wean yourself from the system to the best of your ability. The Woodlander, he gives us a really good blueprint on how to do that.
Yeah.
And, you're not going to be able to conduct any sort of secession or perhaps even like some sort of revolution unless you have certain tangible things. If you don't have supplies or logistics, it's probably not going to go very far. That's why I think the idea of forming these sort of parallel structures or a parallel society is a very good thing. Just to talk about like secession, I mean, you really don't have to have a large percentage of a given area's population to actually be doing the fighting. I've always read this. I think it's like, if you have 10%, that's roughly
It's
more
even
than
less.
enough.
I think it's like
I've heard
like 3%.
I was about to say I've heard the number as low as 2 to 3%. So I think the key is just trying to become self-reliant. Now, here in Appalachia, say if there was some sort of Appalachian secession, or I can look back at the Civil War. You look at the Civil War, West Virginia broke off from the state of Virginia. Virginia, of course, famous. It was Robert E. Lee's state. There was a lot of the wealthy planter class in the flatlands of Virginia. Now, my area, my region of East Tennessee, Tennessee's divided into East, Middle, and West. It almost followed the suit of West Virginia, because people here, we didn't own slaves. We were too fucking poor. We didn't have no slaves. The land here is not conducive to plantation farming. It's conducive to, just families, a few families getting together and maybe doing some sharecropping, but any of these large plantations is out the window. I know for a fact that the East Tennessee, it was Union sympathetic. There are 33 counties in East Tennessee, 33. Every county in East Tennessee, except for 2, voted to stay in the Union. See, so there was a tremendous rift. I mean, even the one ancestor I have that was in the Civil War that I can confirm, he would have been my great ×4 uncle. And he was a member. He enlisted when he was 42 years old. That's when the war broke out. He was in the 13th Cavalry Regiment out of Knoxville, Tennessee. This, even though it was a Tennessee regiment, it was a Union regiment. So it was very divided. I've talked to some other people from Appalachia. The Civil War is just, and I don't pretend to be any sort of expert on it, because there's so many things I believe that is that are just misrepresented, obviously.
Mhm.
And it was an extremely, even here in Appalachia, it was extremely conflicted. I know Western North Carolina, I believe they were more Confederate sympathetic, even though it's just as rugged over there. It varied from town to town or holler to holler, you could even say. So, anyway, I know that I didn't mean to go off on that tangent that far, but
I think the question is about legitimacy. It's about obtaining legitimacy. And I was talking about this the other day too, in relation to people's delusions or fantasies of how this is all going to play out. And I think well before you can have delusions of glorious uprisings and things like that, you have to have legitimacy. Because if you don't have legitimacy, no one's going to rally to your cause. You're not going to get political backing from other countries that could be your allies. You're not going to get material support from those countries that could be your allies. And so you need legitimacy. And that can be, that's an issue that is going to be different in each respective country where people are going to take on this quest, this challenge of trying to be more local, more independent, breaking away from a nation state that they feel is no longer looking out for their best interest and is in fact antagonistic towards them. I suppose we could all agree that Oriana in South Africa, I think it's Oriana. I always read it as Oriana, but that could be dyslexia. It might actually be pronounced differently, but I think it's Oriana. They seem to have pulled it off for now, knock on wood. But again, that's the country of South Africa. There might be differences in the various states of the United States or differences in a European country where that becomes a bit more complicated. And the path to legitimacy, the path to being able to legitimately do that is different. And then if we're getting to like a shit hit the fan situation, well, then I suppose legitimacy won't matter and it'll just be necessity. People do this out of necessity. And Gaddius was asking about, things that could Orania, thank you, Angriff. Orania, or Orania. I don't know again the pronunciation. But another thing to keep in mind too is like how this could form and how people could start to break away. I think that in particular in a country like America, that even its white population are different ethnicities, different European ethnicities. We mustn't forget that shared customs, I suppose you call it shared values, plays a role as well. And so I think that will also be something that can bring people together, form a sort of a bond of kinship, is that, look, you're white, I'm white, okay, you're Scotch-Irish and I'm, Polish ancestry, but we're also going to unite on shared values. And then that could be a path forward in that particular context. How long can you guys stick around for?
I'm still good. I'm fine. I'm a bit tired, but I'm fine.
I could probably hang around for about 15 or 20 more minutes.
Okay.
Shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I can do about 15 more minutes. That's about it.
All right, let's. That's what I was thinking too. Let's stick to 15 because there's some questions here that I want to get to. I think we've addressed pretty much all of the current things and timeless questions that we wanted to address.
Well, there's one more point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, go
I
on.
do think that the idea of the theme of secession is very different for Americans as it is for places in Europe. In the UK, there's been, I think it was a couple of years ago. It was up in Northumbria. There was a kind of separatist group that was going around trying to promote the idea of a northern separation.
Yes, I remember that.
In the UK, there's a lot of a hatred towards London and the sort of London centric politics and Westminster and whatnot. So with this sort of northern secession, a lot of people took an interest in it because it seemed like it was promoting the idea of a national separation from the from the central power of London. However, it turned out that it was very much a Marxist-driven endeavour. And the whole point of doing so was to create national disunity. And it's an interesting thing also with Scottish independence. And while I do support the Scottish independence as its own nation that can manage its own affairs for its own people, with the whole Scottish independence movement, what it's aiming for is to be able to get back into the European Union since Brexit. So there's always something to be concerned about when you see secession movements, and obviously you've seen that with Catalonia being quite leftist driven. But sometimes you'll find that there's something disingenuous about secession movements that aren't for nationalist or for national interests. They seem to try to get out of one nation and basically try to create a very globalized view. They want to take a people out of their national interest. And,
this is such an important point. You're entirely right, and this is why the nationalist right needs to get its act together and enter this stage. Because why is it that Soros is investing in Catalonia independence activism? Why is it that the SNP, the Scottish nationalists, are a bunch of libtards who, and both of these, these sects, both of these groups, why is it that, what they want to do immediately after gaining independence from the nation state that they are part of is run into the arms of the European Union? Because I get this challenge to me, particularly from Spanish nationalists or Italian nationalists who are like really pro-unification and all that kind of thing. And they'll say, well, that's exactly what the Zionists want. They want a Europe of small independent nations. And it's like, no, Zionists have always thrived in empire. Look at the arc of history. Look at what's happening. Do you really think that their aim is a map full of small independent nations based on ethnocentric ideals? Obviously not. But
it's like they're idealists.
So what's the explanation of why is Soros investing in all these Catalan Antifa, secessionists, and why are the Scottish all full of shitlibs? If secessionism and independence movements are so worthwhile, why are they full of the worst people? Well, it's because their objective isn't to be nationalists and independent based on ethnocentric ideals. Their objective is to become bootlickers of the European Union, which is the Zionist enterprise. So it's like they're not taking that last step to see what is the ultimate objective of these piss-poor nationalist movements that the right needs to take on, but not in the sense of defending the paradigm of the nation state, which is no longer fit for purpose in many cases.
Yeah, when you see people like Soros funding secession movements, and it does seem on the surface that he's supporting what would otherwise be nationalist endeavours. The end goal of that is to break away nations, to break away like a part of a nation in order to put them into a new power block. It's basically relocating independent nations and then moving them into a large globalized power block.
Exactly.
So in this case, it'd be taking the...
it's a sleight of hand. It's a trap. And the fact that the right is just, letting this all happen and not seeing through the trap and just saying, no, viva la monarquia, or, long live the United Kingdom, whatever, because that's the paradigm that they're used to. And that's what they've been conned into thinking is proper conservatism, just conserve the status quo. Well, no, there's something beyond that. We can aspire to something more. And I think right-wing nationalists, ethno-nationalist types, like I would say all of us, should be paying attention to this a lot more and not letting this stage just be occupied by Soros and his puppets. Okay, there's a question here that I want to get to as time is running short. It's for the panel as well. Black Pigeon Pilled asks, I'm curious to hear you and the panel discuss localism interact with globalism. Most people seem to think it'll arise out of a collapse scenario, but I'm confident it's already happening. So I kind of touched on this earlier. I'll throw this to the panel. In particular, your responses about this collapse scenario. A lot of people talk about this collapse thing. My brief thought is that I don't think collapse is going to be very dramatic. I think it's going to be slow, frustrating, and tiresome, and just things are going to not work very well. And I don't think it's going to be like, Mad Max. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, you're right. That's my friend Rich Hauk talks about this. He says there's not going to be some catastrophic collapse one day. We're going to wake up and everything's collapsed. It's already happening right now. And as far as how it interacts with localism, that's kind of what I touched on earlier about the regime being like the strongest it's ever been, but it's also the weakest it's ever been, and it's also going to get weaker and weaker, not be able to impose its will as much because just because people are going to drop out and you just stop paying attention to what the regime wants, and that's going to come more into play over time, especially as things deteriorate as the collapse progresses that we're in right now. So that's my take on that.
All right, gentlemen.
Yeah, I'd also agree with that. I do think that any sort of collapse like this isn't likely going to happen. It is going to be very slow. It is going to be very prolonged, and a lot of the infrastructure, it's not something that even if there is a scarcity problem, which is a genuine concern, I do think that now that the infrastructure has been built, it will be reused and remade rather than collapse entirely. And that's a unfortunate issue, but at the same time, it is something that we know that we can at least build on that basis.
Yeah.
Right, Southern Nordic.
I was going to say quickly, I also agree with everyone here's expectations. I know after witnessing what we've seen in 2020 with the Summer of Love and the Corona crackdown,
the Summer of George.
Yeah, old Fentanyl Floyd, old Saint Fentanyl. But
my favorite's Nelson Luther Floyd Jr.
Nelson Luther Floyd. That's brilliant.
That's a good one. That's a good one. But it's like we're in this weird sort of paradoxical situation where you can see that this sort of civilization is like tottering on the edge. You can see the fault lines forming, but somehow it is still resilient enough to kind of choke down.
That's the word, resilient.
Yeah, I think while civilization is fragile, I think it's also more resilient than a lot of people like to give it credit for, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with everyone here. The collapse, after seeing that, now it's just like, what's next? And it's, I don't know. I think it took a long time for the Roman Empire to fall, and it'll probably take a long time for the gay to fall. It's just my thoughts.
And then usually what happens after a massive super state empire type entity falls, like the Roman Empire, like the Soviet Union, you usually see the rise of small nations that were the subjects of that super state, of that superpower. And so again, I think we need the positive vision. We need something to strive for. And for me personally, I think I have found it in talking about this and in trying to get people to shift their thinking, because for the most part, when I used to broach the subject amongst friends and chat groups and things, pretty much everyone was in favor of the pan-European solidarity and we got to have a white super state and all the thing. And I just want to get more people on my side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, any final thoughts from you guys before we wrap this up?
It's been a pleasure talking to you folks. I'd like to say to Southern Nordic, I too am a fellow Appalachian too, and I'm glad to hear.
No way. Hell yeah.
I'm from up north though. I'm from up in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania territory.
Oh, so, yeah. Nice.
And I'd like to let the audience know that's the correct way to pronounce Appalachia too. There's no Appalachia.
Damn right. That's
it's Appalachia. Right. But yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. Hwitgeard,
love following your takes on Telegram, and Pox
Thank you.
got a everyone should subscribe to Pox's Substack. I don't really shill. I usually just cheerlead for other people. So if I'm gonna leave off, I'd like
Oh
to.
God, my Substack, man. I haven't written on that since I think summer of 2022. I've been very lazy about that.
You had some fire on there though.
I did, yeah, and
Yeah.
and then I think I just kind of gassed out.
But yeah,
there is some things that I want to get back to writing, but I usually prefer to chat amongst friends on a stream about it, or
yeah.
And also sometimes when you write on Substack, it feels like writing an essay in college or something. And it's just like I'd rather chat with friends on a stream or something like that. But yeah.
You got a knack for writing, so I'd encourage you to keep at it, and I'd encourage everyone on this side of things to go ahead and start a Substack too. And the person I'd like to cheerlead for is Mighty Morgoth, as usual. But last November, it don't seem like he really toots his horn all that much. But last November, he got one of those. He got like the Substack equivalent of a blue check or whatever on Substack. He's like one of the best sellers or whatever, Substack bestseller. And that just goes to show, like, when the playing field's even,
Yes.
like our guys are going to win. And I'd encourage everybody to check out Morgoth's Substack, because he's got some fire.
If I'm not
essays.
mistaken, I think someone either on like GB News or someone in like quote unquote the mainstream of British media clearly was reading Morgoth because he riffed on like one of Morgoth's turns of phrases or something, or one of Morgoth's metaphors, clearly indicating that this guy in the mainstream is paying attention to Morgoth.
There was this thing last year. Morgoth had this essay about like the underwater cables going across the ocean or whatever.
Oh, that was brilliant.
And like 2 days later, Tulsi Gabbard was on Joe Rogan talking about underwater.
I think that was it. Maybe that was it. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, like, man, we got some.
That was it.
There's people there's people paying attention to this side of things.
Definitely.
So yeah, everyone subscribe to Morgoth's Substack. Get him up in the top bestsellers so you can own the libs. And I heard one of you guys mentioned I'll Take My Stand earlier. And he's got a fire Twitter account. He's got nuclear hot takes every day, and great poster too. So I'm gonna go ahead and hop off here. My phone's about to take a crap. So pleasure meeting all you guys and talking.
Pleasure.
And you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Gaddius.
All right, take it easy.
All right, you too.
All right, gentlemen. I think we will wrap it up there then. Thanks for coming on. Everyone do find Southern Nordic. He streams on YouTube and Odyssey. He's also got a Telegram channel called Sono Syndicate, right?
Yeah, it's Sono Syndicate.
Okay.
That's where
because your other one got hit by the Google and Apple censors.
Yeah. Somehow I'm still on YouTube, and that's where most.
I can't believe that you got banned on Telegram, but you're still on YouTube.
I think I upset the wrong type of people on Telegram somehow. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It was right when we did our stream back in September. That was right when it happened. But anyways, that's where you can find me.
All right, and Hwitgeard is also got a great Telegram channel. You can type his name just as it's spelled here onto Telegram and find him there. And you've got an Odyssey channel as well.
Nice.
Oh, you as well, yeah.
You Hwitgeard. I didn't actually know you had an Odyssey channel.
I didn't either until the beginning of the stream. I subbed to it right after he posted it.
Yeah, well, so far on there, I've just I've repeated some of the streams that I've been on and just reuse those on there. But I will start making my own original content, original videos this year. I do have a Substack as well, and I'm definitely more of a writer than I am a speaker. You can tell that I'm still quite fresh and new to this speaking, but I'm getting the hang of it a lot better now. But I am more of a writer in general, and I really should put that more to practice on my Substack. So I hope to make more use of that this year as well.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that then. We love content
Yes,
here on
we
the Pox
do.
Populi channel. So, all right, guys, thanks for hopping on the stream. It was a pleasure
Thanks for having
chatting
me
to
on.
you all.
Thank
And
you.
that's it. So again, another special occasion here on the video channels. But again, if you want to keep up with Pox Populi on the main stopping ground, then you have to find me on Telegram. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.